do it properly. So, Esther, 1 minute for you.
Questions to AstraZeneca. 1. AstraZeneca entered into the production of the so-called Oxford vaccine in May 2020. At that time, were there any pre-existing contracts that linked production facilities situated in the EU to the United Kingdom? For example, contracts concluded by the Oxford Consortium that incorporate EU production facilities into the production chain for UK deliveries. Second question, were the grants from the British government received by this Oxford Consortium conditional on the use of EU production for UK deliveries or on the non-delivery from UK production facilities to the EU? And if there were no pre-existing obligations or conditionality, and given the fact that the EU and the UK contracts are comparable in terminology and more or less signed at the same time, why did the company decide to drop deliveries to the EU by 60% in Q1 and not to other parts of the world? Did you knowingly enter into contractual obligations you knew you could not or never deliver on to all parties? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Christian Heller for the EPP.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're living in nervous times, and being a former CEO of a biotechnology center, I think politics should formulate at that given moment that we really convey, that we really appreciate your efforts. It's unseen before. I know the complexity of production. So my questions are directly related to that. Given that the quality control represents substantial amount of manufacturing time, where could we speed up without sacrificing safety and quality standards? Are the rules and regulations that could be harmonized or standardizations across Europe to help to speed up production and distribution? Which legal impediments are you facing inside the EU and outside the EU that slow down a smooth production or distribution process? And in more general terms, next month the WTO will decide on the requested waiver of IP rights. I understand this is not your preferred option, but what would be the preferred option? Because we are looking now to the production ordered of the EU, we are looking then to the production which might be needed to cope with the virus. But Europe and the United States are the drugstore of the world. So how do you cope with the amount of doses we will need?
Thank you, Christian. Who are you? Which panelist are you asking your question to? Okay, so let's move to Pascal Soriot, because the question from Mr. De Lange was addressed to you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. De Lange. So to answer your question, when we entered the agreement with Oxford in May 2020, we inherited a number of contracts that were novated to us. It's important to know that Oxford University started the development of this vaccine back in January last year, just like every other company did. And the UK government became involved very early on, maybe in January or February, and funded the development of the vaccine, and also funded the capital investment required to scale up manufacturing at facilities in the UK, but also in the Netherlands. And so they, of course, entered agreement with those companies. When we signed a contract with Oxford, all these agreements were novated to us. So the UK actually, of course, granted a lot of money to Oxford University to develop the vaccine, and also, as I said, funded the capital investment required to manufacture the vaccine in the facility of our partner in the Netherlands. The reason why our supply is lower than we expected is very simple. Is to do with a lower yield, lower productivity than we expected. Unfortunately, the manufacturing of a vaccine is a very complex biological process that involves thousands of elements to track, and it requires a learning phase. And some sites have have ramped up very quickly, and other sites have been a little slower. And so this question of yield has impacted our ability to deliver the volume we were looking for the EU. I can tell you, though, that the overwhelming majority of what is manufactured in the EU, including the Netherlands facility, is actually going to EU supply.
Okay, so are you happy with the answers? Okay. So we move to the second set of questions from S&D Group, Jutta Götterlund.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the CEOs for being here. First, two questions to AstraZeneca. Although invoking best reasonable effort, it is unacceptable that the shortfall is of a magnitude of above 60% of the agreed quotas from December 2020 to March 2021. In that regard, exactly how will AstraZeneca ensure that such shortcomings is urgently remedied? I don't think we got an answer to that. And how does AstraZeneca explain the export of vaccine produced in the EU to the UK, but at the same time the company is not willing to ship vaccine from the production site in the UK to the EU, although these are very specifically mentioned in the APA? Allegedly, the EU is supposed to receive vaccine doses from the Indian production site instead. I would like to hear what you have to say about that. And then to Moderna, I would like to hear about practical solutions and synergies you can foresee to strengthen the cooperation between the companies so that vaccine production can increase. I think we got answers to that from the others, but I'd like to hear more from you on that.
Thank you very much. Danica?
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte. Pentru Moderna și Curevac am două întrebări concrete. Ați fi dispuși să dați acces sau să asigurați transferul de tehnologie cu scopul de a stimula producția și de a crea o mai bună utilizare în comun a capacităților de producție din Uniunea Europeană, eventuală colaborare cu statele membre? Și dacă da, care sunt planurile dumneavoastră concrete în acest sens, mai ales odată cu apariția noilor variante de COVID-19? O altă întrebare. Care este concret pentru fiecare dintre dumneavoastră eficacitatea vaccinurilor, nu eficiența, deci eficacitatea în lumea reală a acestor vaccinuri față de noile variante și vă rog să referiți față de varianta din Marea Britanie, braziliană și sud-africană și cât estimați că durează dozele care în prezent au fost administrate a vaccinurilor, această imunitate, cât durează ea? Și acest lucru este extrem de important pentru toți cetățenii Uniunii Europene, pentru că toți doresc ca să aibă o evaluare corectă și precisă a acestor informații care sunt vitale pentru succesul campaniei de vaccinare și vă cer tuturor să vă îndepliniți angajamentele asumate și să aveți un comportament corect. Vă mulțumesc.
Thank you. So we start again with Pascal SORIOT for AstraZeneca.
Thank you so much. So the first question relates to best reasonable effort and what we will do. And I can tell you our team, we have thousands of people working 24/7 to address these issues. We have, of course, our engineers working with our partners to improve yield. We have sites sharing knowledge across the network. And essentially, what we are working on is improving the yield, and as our teams learn from each other and improve their knowledge, the yield is increasing. So in Q2, we are very confident that the yield will increase across the network. So that's one thing we are working very hard on, is improving the yield, the productivity of each site. The yield is actually the number of doses of vaccine that you extract out of 1 liter in your bioreactor. We have bioreactors that have 1,000 liters or 2,000 liters, and depending on how many doses of vaccine you get per liter, then of course it influences the number of vaccines you can produce. And the yield varies from a factor of 1 to 2 between sites. So one aspect is this. The second aspect is our supply network is set up regionally with an essential focus on each region, but we also manage it globally, like any pharmaceutical company. We manage our network globally, and so we are looking at other sites around the network, helping to produce vaccine and supply to the European community, so that by Q2 we actually catch up to the volume that we had projected originally to produce. And those sites will be a variety of locations around the world, including the United States and some others. In terms of the efficacy, if I can cover also this question, our vaccine in our clinical trials has shown an efficacy of 100% against hospitalization and severe disease. And this has been confirmed in real-world evidence now. A Scottish study in 1.1 million people vaccinated, essentially older people, more than 60, and a large number above the age of 80. This study showed a 94% reduction of hospitalization. So as you can see, very much confirming the 100% or so that we got in clinical trials. And in the clinical trials, if you look at the totality of the disease, because when you look at COVID, you have to look at severe disease, hospitalization, and then overall disease, including moderate cases of disease. If you give the vaccine at 2 doses at 3 months interval, because in the case of our technology, the dosing interval influences the efficacy. The 2 doses at 3 months interval give a 92% protection against cases of moderate and severe disease. But again, close to 100% in real life against hospitalization and severe disease.
Thank you very much. So I now give the floor to the Moderna CEO, Stéphane BANCEL.
Could you please press the speak button?
Sorry. So if you look at the situation of Moderna, when the pandemic started last year, we had only 800 employees, and we had no manufacturing operation in Europe. I was worried about nationalism and restriction of export. And so what the team did is build a supply chain that is 100% relying on partnership. The drug substance is made in Switzerland, in Lonza, which is the largest contract manufacturers for pharmaceutical products in the world. And the filling is made in Rovi in Spain, which is also a partner, and Decifarm in France, starting very soon. And the distribution for the shipment is done out of Belgium with yet another partner. And that was very important for us. The thing that is very difficult with mRNA for Moderna, but all the mRNA players, is that there's never been an mRNA product approved in the world before the Pfizer BioNTech and the Moderna vaccine approved earlier this year or in December in the US. And so you cannot go to a company and have them start right away to make mRNA product. They don't have the equipment. In Lonza, we had to spend 2 or 3 months basically destroying the room and rebuilding the room because the size of the equipment and the setup of the room was different. And so it is not easy to do that with new partners because there is no capacity. As you know, no large pharmaceutical companies in Europe or in Asia or in the US has done mRNA before. And so they don't have the equipment, they don't have a trained workforce. And because of the safety and the quality of a vaccine, which is critical, there is a lot of processes for training, for validation of the equipment, and that takes a lot of time, sometimes months. So that's for the first question on the partnership. On the variant question, what we published scientifically recently is the Moderna vaccine for the strain first identified in the UK has the same level of antibody. So we believe that the protection will be the same as what we see with the original strain of the virus. For the first variant identified in the Republic of South Africa, we have seen a drop that we reported scientifically in the level of antibody. But what is good news is that that drop is still above the level of antibody seen in people that are convalescent with a natural infection. So we believe that we should provide protection against that strain from South Africa. The piece that is unknown, which is your other question on duration, is long-term duration. As you know, the big efficacy studies, at least ours, started in July 27 of last year. So we don't even yet have 1 year of data. This is a multi-year study for which we're, of course, monitoring and regularly publishing updates of the study efficacy. And it's the same for all the vaccine. The challenge of a pandemic, unlike a typical vaccine, is we do not have the ability to have years and years of clinical data to know. So we'll have to just monitor and potentially boost people, especially the elderly and people with comorbidity. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to the last answer from Curevac, Mr. HAAS.
Could you please press the speak button?
Sorry, could you repeat the question because the translation system didn't work at the time when the question was stated? Sorry about that.
It was a question regarding the efficacy of your vaccine.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, what we've been seeing in our phase 1-2 was a high. The trials in the phase 1 and 2 is not designed to have a readout on the efficacy. Though what we can say is that the antibodies, what we could see is exactly in the range, on the one side, in the range of convalescent subjects, which these are the protective antibodies. And the other one, what we have been seeing is that the ratio between the antibodies is exactly, in our vaccine, is exactly 1-to-1 what we have been seeing in the natural infection, which we see as a quality stamp. And on the basis of these data, we entered into the phase 2B and 3, where we are now waiting for the data to come and provide exactly that. What we could see, it's a double-blinded study. What we can see so far is, without having deep-blinded, of course, the study is that we see a drop of the cases. The cases is exactly by definition of these subjects which are included in the trial, which then catch COVID-19 infection, that you see that there is a drop. But we will see what the data will bring, and therefore there cannot be any promises. However, on the variants, we are certainly doing testings as well, and we just received these data, which we are going to publish soon, that we see that with the UK strain, so the strain which has been first discovered in the UK, as well as the South African strain, we see a very nice protection. This is a preclinical study, an animal study, where we see 100% protection, and these data will be published soon. So our expectations on the clinical trial, what we are seeing at the moment, and this is certainly in areas where different strains are already existing, that we expect a high efficacy of these clinical trial data as well, which then would lead into, hopefully on the basis of these data, into an approval, where I said this would be expected to be in June.
Thank you so much. We'll try to accelerate a little bit, and we have a kind request, myself and Pascal, not to ask questions to all four distinguished guests, maybe just pick one or two in order to be as effective as possible. We go to the Renew group now and to the two coordinators. First, Mr. Niels Torvalds.
Thank you, Chair. We are, of course, interested in the future of the virus, and that's not for genealogical reason, even if we are very, very distant relatives of COVID-19. I think there is a great possibility or probability that we will see the COVID-19 go around for the next years or the next decades. And therefore, one of the questions which have been discussed here in the Parliament is an open source approach to the question of medicines, antiviral medicines. When the open source movement started in 1991, the big companies were very reluctant today they have understood that the open source is actually helping them. The same insights could also help you. And I would like to have an answer from Stan ERCK. We wouldn't like to leave our American friends today on the outside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Torvalds. I invite Martina Labaeva to take the floor, ITRE coordinator in you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Well, please allow me to reinstate that Renew is firmly behind the joint procurement effort led by the Commission. This approach will ensure that no one is left behind. And of course, we need as well cooperation among Commission, national authorities and companies to overcome bottlenecks in supply. I think that we are partners and we are facing the same challenge, so we have to work on it together. I have a question directed to Curevac and Novavax, because I want to look a little bit more at the future. I would ask you if you are already looking at the process Moderna described to extend cooperation with the existing supply chain in Europe. And with this, I mean not only companies who don't produce their own vaccine, but they have necessary equipment and facilities, but as well a wider cooperation in Europe, as well in bottling, labeling and logistics, let's say. So what are your plans? Because now we really need to show the trust to our citizens. Their citizens need to trust and they need to see that we have clear plans for extending the production and accelerating it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina. I go now to Mr. Stan ERCK to respond both to Mr. Torvalds and Madame Labaeva. Mr. ERCK, just press the speak button.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. To respond to the first question, I believe that the question was about open source and making data available. I think the industry and we have been very open with publications of all of our data, and I agree that publication from everybody's data teaches us how the vaccines work. I think that when Moderna and Pfizer first published their data on efficacy in their phase 3 trial and got in the mid-90s as far as efficacy, I think that was a lesson for all of us that what we were doing was on the right track, and I think that gave us a lot of confidence to proceed as rapidly as possible. So that's been very helpful. I think with respect to the question about the future and extended cooperations with Novavax specifically, we have actually gone like my colleagues at Moderna, where we started a year ago with 0 manufacturing capacity. We now have 27 agreements in place in 7 European countries, and so we have expanded our capacity dramatically and on a global basis, and anticipating that borders could be closed at some point. We set up capacity in Europe, in India, in the U.S., and in Asia, in Korea, and Japan. So we've got global capacity, and we think the capacity is sufficient to meet the needs for the foreseeable future.
Thank you so much. I go now to Curevac, Mr. HAAS or Mr. Anthony Blanc, please.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, we are actually, as we speak, we have got around about 20 partners in Europe with regard to the pDNA production, with regard to the mRNA production, with regard to the LNP, this is a formulation, the lipid nanoparticle production, and all of those more than 1 up to 5 partners. And then the filling finish, the labeling, packaging, as well as the diluent production. And all of what we do, yes, we are producing since 2006 mRNA already on a GMP crate to run clinical trials. But as I said, this was until last year all homeopathic. And we have got a new manufacturing facility which can just by itself produce 1 billion dosages on the 12 microgram per dose, what our current vaccine is. And the next generation will be even lower. So that's a kind of technology is driving force. For covering the variants, but also thinking about multivalent vaccines, because I agree COVID will stay around for a while and nobody knows really whether it's going to further mutate or stays as a seasonal vaccine. And therefore the collaboration all over Europe is certainly essential as well. And then certainly there is collaboration also out of the box with where we are producing and developing a micro factory, which is mobile, which you then can bring there as well. This is an affiliated company which has been acquired by Tesla, where we said we need to have also quick and fast manufacturing units in order to cover perhaps even regions where a virus is breaking out, a variant where you really can also take action to help the virus spreading around. And what we are doing certainly here in Europe, which is all in Europe at the moment, is a blueprint to bring it all over the world as well. And in order to fight the next vaccine as well, because there is no doubt that the entire world needs to be vaccinated, and we have got the technologies in our hand. And all what we are doing right now for COVID-19 is a preparation for pandemic outbreak preparedness.
Thank you so much. I go now to ID Group, and I invite first Madame Simona Baldassare.
Grazie Presidente. Dobbiamo constatare purtroppo come il progetto di vaccinazione europeo sia fallito e così raggiungeremo un'immunizzazione sufficiente fra 3 anni. I dati della distribuzione delle dosi sono impietosi. Israele ha già vaccinato l'85% delle persone, gli Emirati Arabi il 56%, il Regno Unito il 27%, gli Stati Uniti il 19% e l'Unione Europea è fanalino di coda con appena il 6%. Questi numeri non sono accettabili anche di fronte all'incombere delle varianti. È evidente che è necessaria una nuova strategia di vaccinazioni. Il punto centrale questa volta deve essere la produzione. Dobbiamo mirare a una condivisione delle licenze per stabilire una produzione interna europea. In Italia, ad esempio, il governo sta portando avanti col Ministero dello Sviluppo Economico un progetto per cercare di fare sistema con le industrie farmaceutiche ed organizzare una produzione interna. La domanda è rivolta ad Astrazeneca. Qual è la vostra strategia per la condivisione dei brevetti al fine di aumentare la produzione interna agli Stati membri dei vaccini? Grazie.
Grazie molto. J'invite maintenant Madame Gelmelen. Je vous en prie.
Ma question est à Monsieur Bancel. Monsieur, votre laboratoire Moderna, comme ceux qui ont utilisé la méthode de l'ARN messager, a pu tout en même temps utiliser les travaux très anciens et avancés et antérieurs à l'épidémie de SARS-CoV-2 et faire chevaucher les différentes phases ordinaires des essais. Ainsi, semble-t-il, vous auriez commencé à faire les premières injections sur l'homme dès le 16 mars, soit 10 semaines après le début officiel de la pandémie. Pourtant, comme tous les Européens, je ne peux que regretter le décalage préjudiciable entre les effets d'annonce et certaines promesses manifestement impossibles à tenir et la réalité de diffusion des vaccins en Europe. Pour être pragmatique, monsieur, comment comptez-vous anticiper au mieux une production de masse pour lutter contre une crise par définition imprévue mais surtout inconnue? Et comment, plus généralement, comptez-vous fournir au plus tôt aux États membres la liste des médicaments de crise dits critiques, au-delà des investissements et des partenariats renforcés? Je vous remercie.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. I will give now the floor to Mr. Pascal Soriot, CEO Astrazeneca, to respond to the first question.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, very important one. We decided to manufacture and distribute this product at no profit, so we are as close as you can get to a network that is totally open. As it relates to IP, and sharing these patents, the issue in this case is really not so much about sharing patents, it's about scaling up to large manufacturing capacity. And in fact, as you heard all my colleagues, the entire industry is working 24/7 to scale up and increase capacity. But it is important to understand that to manufacture in additional sites, you have to teach the site how to manufacture the vaccine. So we do what is called the technology transfer. We send our engineers to a site to explain to people how to manufacture the vaccine. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time to explain. It takes a lot of time to test, validate the work that is done in this site. So it's not that easy to add sites. People having access to our patents would not help them much if they didn't know how to manufacture the vaccine. We have to teach them. And I can tell you our people, our teams are absolutely stretched to the maximum. There's no way they could train any more people. We have trained lots and lots of sites, and they could not train more people. And I'm sure it's the same for all my colleagues. Their teams are stretched to the maximum. So I really think the issue is not an issue of patents, it's an issue of capacity and manufacturing capacity around the world, and we are all working to increase it as quickly as we can.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soriot. I give the floor now to Mr. BANCEL, Stéphane BANCEL.
Thank you very much for the question. So manufacturing usually takes 3 to 4 years to build manufacturing before product launch. The challenge we have as an industry, which is why you are seeing from all the companies startup problems, is that our teams have worked non-stop 7 days a week for a year now to get the manufacturing ready to do what was believed to be unthinkable, which was to be ready for a new product in a year. And so because we are still improving the productivity of different manufacturing processes, what we are seeing is what I would call hiccup startup issues, which are very typical in any industry, whether you make cars or airplanes or pharmaceutical products, you have startup issues. Things like we had a few weeks ago, a pump broke on a weekend. And the team spent several days non-stop, they worked during the night as well, to replace the pump. But because we have to make medicine, safety and quality is non-negotiable. And so in the industry, the regulators, rightly so, ask us to document that the qualification of that equipment, in that case the pump, was in accordance to what the pump was designed for. And so then you have to do a lot of validation, qualification, and then you have to document everything so that we are sure that the pump in that case is able to make production again. And so because we run non-stop, the days we lost to replace the pump and the days we lost for the documentation that the new pump was functional as designed for the process, for the safety of a product, that time we lost forever. Because as we run non-stop, all the days you don't make product, you cannot catch up because you run non-stop. And that's the issues you are seeing across the industries, is there is no inventory to manage those type of startup issue. And every time there is a human error, an equipment breaking, or as we had the question earlier, a raw material from one of our suppliers late by a day, you cannot start making the product because it will not be safe and you will not have the right quality. So that's the issue the industry is having, and the output is improving. And I'm sure it's the same with all my colleagues on the panel. If you look at the data month by month, the input is improving. The quantity of product we can make every month is going up. And I can anticipate it's still going up and accelerating because of the learnings that the teams are having. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move to the next two questions from the Greens, starting with Bas Eickhout. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't see myself, but okay, I'll start. Thank you very much. To AstraZeneca, on the contracts, because it's still not clear. You said there were prior agreements from Oxford University with the British government already dating January, February 2020. However, some of the production sites in the UK contract are also in the UK production line, are also in the EU production line. So how did you explain this during the negotiations for the EU contract, where it's saying that contracts with third parties like the UK should not hamper any of the production? And that is still not clear. Please be clear on that. To Curevac, because we want to look at the global production. In the Curevac contract that I read, you are explicitly demanding prior consent before a European country is giving, can donate vaccines to NGOs or even World Health Organization. Why are you demanding prior consent from that? Because it will hinder global production. Thank you.
Thank you. Villiers Ninisto for the Greens.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we all want mass production to go forward and our populations to get vaccinated. But obviously, we have been told by several of you manufacturers that there are production problems that are cause of the delay for the EU countries. But last year, the EU pumped several billion euros into the agreements with the companies, including money for ramping up production facilities. So our question is whether these commitments are upheld from the company's side in an equal basis. And another thing I would like to ask is, could you explain if there is indeed a secondary market of vaccines, as has been rumored? We have rumors that some brokers are selling vaccines, considering the manufacturers say that they sell vaccines only to the governments. Can you explain how there is a secondary market according to these rumors, and how it is the situation about your own vaccine? And another thing, if we look at the global access to vaccines, the WHO's CTAP program has insofar not been used by any of your technologies and vaccines. How do you explain that you are not part of the CTAP program in opening technology and making sure that vaccines are globally available? Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have the time to give the floor to all the panelists, so we will focus on AstraZeneca and Curevac. Pascal Soriot, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Eckhout. The first question you asked relates to the agreement, and indeed there was an agreement with several agreements signed by the UK government with manufacturers. One is in the Netherlands, one is in the UK. And we are actually sharing, because essentially the Netherlands manufacturer was reserved originally by the UK, and in fact that manufacturer is supplying Europe today. So there is definitely sharing. The issue we have faced, as I explained, is the low yield we reached in some of the sites that are supplying the EU. But there's absolutely sharing. And I think it's also important to remember that the supply chain serving the UK is geared to supply 65 million people who live in the UK. The European community has about 450 million people, I believe. So, the UK, even if we took the entire supply of the UK, it would not make a huge difference to the European community. So there is sharing, that's absolutely clear, and what is made in the EU, as I said before, overwhelmingly stays in the EU, including the site in the Netherlands that was originally reserved by the UK. As far as the money, the commitments, we will deliver on our commitments. The money we've received so far has gone directly to suppliers, either to buy material or alternatively to reserve capacity in this industry. You have to pay what is called a reservation fee to a manufacturer. So you reserve the capacity they have and you pay them in advance, and that's standard in the industry. And finally, as it relates to secondary markets, there is absolutely no secondary market as we are concerned. We supply our vaccine as it comes directly to governments. But as Stéphane BANCEL said before, the issue we face is that there's no inventory whatsoever. Typically in our industry, you build inventory, and there's always variations that happen in the manufacturing process. But if you have inventory, you can continue supplying the market in a continuous manner. But here there's no inventory, so each time there is a problem in manufacturing, then immediately you feel the impact at the customer level. And that's a challenge. We need to build inventory, but we can't, because we basically send everything we manufacture immediately.
Thank you. For the CEO of Curevac now, please. The floor is yours.
Listen, I will take the answer for the global access. So global access is really important, of course, to Curevac as well. And we see COVAX as a great facility to enable that. And we have certainly contributed doses into the tender that has been made by COVAX. We've also, as to the other question, explicitly agreed to resale and donation clauses in the contract that you alluded to. And in fact, some of these clauses have been exercised with contracts signed onwards to Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland, for instance. And in terms of these, the reason we've asked for prior consent is to be sure that the conditions are in place in terms of good distribution practices and GMP conditions of transfer of the vaccine even into the country where our vaccine is meant to be moved on and donated from Europe so that the quality and safety is not compromised. So this is why we have put in this clause.
Thank you. So now we move to the next two questions from the ECR group, starting with Alexander Vondra.
Thank you, Pascal. I do have the two quick questions to Novavax, to Stan ERCK. Firstly, according to our information, the process of approval in the UK, it's faster again than in the EU, the same like with the other vaccines. So can you share us as the MEP some opinion, why this is so slow in EMA, and whether there is some advice where we should press the EMA to move forward. And secondly, it's about the money. It costs a lot of money for the research and development. Can you give us at least some rough numbers how much you were able to raise in the United States, including the capital market on one hand, and how much you were able to raise in Europe, including EU and the member states on the other hand, and whether it makes a difference? Thank you.
Thank you. Beata Szydło.
Dziękuję bardzo za przedstawione informacje. Mam konkretne pytanie do przedstawiciela AstraZeneki. Pytanie może być tylko jedno w tym momencie. Kiedy Państwo wywiążecie się ze zobowiązań, które zostały podjęte? Zostały podpisane umowy, kraje się przygotowały, ludzie czekają, budzono nadzieję, a tymczasem nie ma szczepionek. I myślę, że dzisiaj dla nas wszystkich najważniejsze jest to, żeby AstraZeneca przedstawiła również harmonogram dostaw na drugi kwartał. Na to czekamy. I myślę, że trzeba postawić też pytanie do Komisji Europejskiej. Co prawda to dzisiaj mamy nieco inny format naszej dyskusji, ale jest też przedstawiciel Komisji. Co Komisja Europejska ma zamiar zrobić, ażeby wyegzekwować podpisane umowy? Bo jeszcze raz powtórzę, dzisiaj przede wszystkim liczy się czas. Europejczycy czekają na dostawy szczepionek, państwa są przygotowane, właśnie odbywa się szczyt Rady Europejskiej, przywódcy dyskutują o tym, co można zrobić, a więc pytanie również i do przedstawicieli producentów. Jak możemy Państwu pomóc, żeby Europejczycy otrzymali należne im szczepionki? Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. I will give the floor to Stan ERCK for Novavax and to Pascal SORIOT for AstraZeneca, starting with Stan ERCK.
Yeah, thanks again for the questions. So approval in the UK faster than the EU. I think we are first applying to the MHRA in the UK because that's where we ran our trial. And so all of the data that goes to support the application for approval in the UK is actually being shared with the EMA. So I can't predict the timing of EMA approval, but they're getting the data in real time. And as for that matter is the FDA and other regulatory agencies. So we start with the UK because we ran the trial, the phase 3 trial in the UK, but everybody's getting the data at the same time. And for me, it's impossible to predict exactly the timing of the approval for EMA, but obviously it's a very high priority for us. And then the second question was about raising money. We were able to raise money. Actually, the first money that we raised to support this program was from a group called CEPI, which is a non-for-profit organization funded by a number of European governments and the Gates Foundation. And we received a grant for almost $400 million from CEPI to start the program. And that got us in the place where we could start setting up this international group of manufacturing sites and start working with, for that matter, the Serum Institute to make sure that we had global access to our product in low and middle income countries at the same time that high income countries would get it. On top of that, you asked the question how much we raised in the U.S. We did sign a contract with Operation Warp Speed with the U.S. government to support our program in the U.S. for $1.7 billion. And that obviously is being used to run. We just finished a phase 3 clinical trial in the U.S. So,
thank you. Pascal SORIOT.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. The supply schedule, we are working 24/7 really to improve our delivery and hopefully catch up to the expectation for Q2. As I said before, we are looking at improving yields and also leveraging our global supply chain, but it takes time, and it is important to understand that the yield is improving as people learn and become more familiar with the manufacturing process. I think Stéphane said it earlier, you have often startup issues, whether you manufacture cars, planes, anything, vaccines, of course, you often have issues when you start the manufacturing. And typically in our industry, we have years to learn the manufacturing process, refine it, test it, improve it, and we do this in parallel to the clinical development. Here we didn't have that time, we didn't have that luxury, we had 6 months to prepare for the launch and manufacture, so the alternative, of course, would have been to be ready later, but it would have taken more time. So that's basically the challenges we're facing, and it takes time to clarify what kind of hope we can have for the yield improvement and also leveraging our global supply chain. In terms of funding, we got funding from the US government for the development of the vaccine. And other than that, we didn't get funding for the development of the vaccine in Europe. The money we received in Europe was for the manufacturing of the vaccine, which, as I said a minute ago, that money went straight to buying materials or paying for contract manufacturing organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sorio. The last part of the dialogue with the 4 CEOs. We go now to the left group, and I invite Madame Silvia Modig.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for all the CEOs being present today. Question to AstraZeneca. Mr. Soiro, you're like a piece of soap. It's impossible to get a hold of you. How is it possible that you had no clue of your production capacity? Because what has happened is not a minor setback, it's a huge failure. So I will ask it in this way. How can you assure us that we can trust you in the future to keep your part of the agreements and deliver what you have promised? To Moderna, I would like to ask that you have been open to suspending patents. I want to thank you for this constructive approach. But as we know, the patents is not enough if there is not technology and the know-how and knowledge to use it. So what are you willing to share this as well? And what are you willing to commit to in terms of tech transfer? And the last to the Curevac. Also, as my colleague Mr. Eickhout already mentioned, the resale chapter in your APA is very concerning. If your worry is that the quality of the vaccine being redistributed will be sufficient, then it should have been written that way. It's not written that way. It just gives you the right to have prior consent to what the EU does.
Thank you so much. I go to Madame Marisa Matias, please. Marisa.
Obrigada, Presidente. As minhas perguntas são para a AstraZeneca. Numa entrevista ao jornal da La República, de 26 de janeiro, o senhor acusou a Comissão Europeia de ter negociado tarde os contratos. Disse mesmo que a Comissão Europeia negociou os contratos 3 meses mais tarde do que o Reino Unido. No entanto, de acordo com a informação pública que temos, é que parece que o que é verdade é que o contrato com o Reino Unido foi fechado apenas alguns dias depois do contrato com a União Europeia estar fechado. E a minha primeira pergunta é porque é que mentiu ao público e se essa mentira é apenas para desresponsabilizar nas falhas das entregas e da produção por parte da sua companhia. A segunda pergunta tem a ver com o seguinte. Segundo o que apurou a BBC da Universidade de Oxford, a AstraZeneca apenas conseguiu garantir a patente da universidade depois de intensas negociações e de ter acordado produzir as vacinas ao preço de custo durante a pandemia. Se assim é, porque assinou contratos com a União Europeia e com o Reino Unido de forma a manter este preço de custo apenas até junho de 2021. Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much, Marisa. I go, of course, first to Pascal Soriot, because there are several questions to to AstraZeneca, and then very shortly Moderna and Curevac. Please, Monsieur SORIOT.
Thank you so much, Chairman. The first question from Mrs. Modig relates to capacity, and essentially the same response as before is that we are working 24/7 to increase capacity and deliver on this commitment, and we hope that by Q2 we can catch up to where we would like to be. But I think it's important to understand when we entered this agreement with Oxford University, the assumption that the university was using was a yield of 5,000, which means 5,000 doses of vaccine coming out of 1 liter. We took a much lower assumption in our forecast because we wanted to be conservative. But it turns out that some of the sites have delivered this assumption, and some other sites have delivered half of the assumption. And therefore, if you deliver half of the assumption, which is half of the number of doses per liter, then your production is half what you expected. So it's pretty simple. It's just a simple math. If you have a low yield, a low number of vaccines per liter, then you produce less. If we had reached the assumed yield, we would be absolutely on track with our supply. And as I said before, the yield, the productivity is improving, and therefore we believe the volume will grow as we learn, as the sites learn to manufacture. And there are sites around the world that have higher yields, and therefore we are trying to leverage our supply chain globally to help Europe. As far as the contract, as I said before, the contract that matters is the contract we signed in May with Oxford University. And Oxford University novated a number of agreements the UK government had with the suppliers in the UK, and then one supplier in the Netherlands. As you can imagine, the UK government spent tens of millions of pounds to support the development of the vaccine, and also tens of millions of additional pounds to invest in the plans to scale up the manufacturing. And therefore they had agreements, and those agreements were novated to us. So the August agreement is just finalizing some details, but the commitments are already part of the Oxford agreement we signed. So yeah, so that's answered the second question, I think, from Mrs. Matthias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I go now to Mr. BANCEL, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Matthias, for your question. And thank you for your kind words around the IP. So we've done a lot of tech transfer to our partners at different sites of Lonza. And at this time, our team is very constrained to work on ensuring those production issues we talked about, those startup issues, that they are resolved quickly. Those are the same engineers. You know, Moderna, like some other companies on the panel, is a small company. We have 1,300 employees now around the world. And when you take out the clinical team, people in the factories making product, but not the engineers that know how to make the product, our engineering team is quite small. And doing more tech transfer right now will actually put the production and the increase in output for the months to come at very big risk, which I think would be a very unwise decision. Because it will be really difficult then to get to the next few months of deliveries. So we are very open to look into it in the future once the current sites are well performing, which will take a few months, maybe a few quarters. Thank you for your good question.
Thank you so much. And lastly, I would invite Mr. HAAS.
Yes, thank you very much. Coming back to the resale chapter, we have been very transparent to open up the contract in the first place because we think that's exactly the way how it should be. And therefore, you have to read this chapter with a resale that we need to know where our product is going into, because we are keeping the liability, the indemnification exactly on that product. So as the different national laws certainly provide different kind of preconditions and quality constraints and all of that, we need to know where the product is going. And certainly there will be not a denial of approval in case there is no reasonable reason to ship a product to another country. And so that is exactly, you have to read those two provisions together to say, on the one side, there is an indemnification, a liability for the product we are producing. On the other side, exactly for that reason, we need to know where the product is going into. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much. We have another two very relevant committees in the European Parliament, INTA and Budget. So we have one intervention from INTA committee. First Vice Chair Jan Zahardil. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank on behalf of INTA and on behalf of Chairman Lange for invitation. I would like to appreciate the efforts of all companies and CEOs to produce and to deliver as much as possible, because it's really very crucial. And I have two short questions of rather a legal nature. One is about this new authorization mechanism for vaccine exports introduced by the Commission as a follow-up of reduced vaccine deliveries. Has this mechanism had an impact on your ability to fulfill your contracts or created possible issues in your supply chain? And second question is on intellectual property rights in vaccines and the obstacles they may pose for the rapid vaccination. So what are your plans concerning requirements from so-called TRIPS agreement on compulsory licensing, or rather waiving the compulsory licensing and make it unnecessary, which would speed up the delivery of vaccines? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardil. And the chair of Budget Committee, Mr. Van Overveld, has the floor now.
Thank you. First for Mr. Bancel of Moderna. Commission President von der Leyen recently said science beats industry, suggesting that there was too much focus on the development of vaccines and an underestimation of what mass production would mean and would cause as potential problems. Do you agree with that analysis? And secondly, you just said in one of your earlier remarks that production is now growing all over the place, but we see in terms of vaccines being applied a remaining gap between the UK and the US on the one end and the EU on the other end, and even a relative increase of that gap. Second question I have for Mr. SORIOT, which is based on the recent or increasing evidence that we should focus on the first dose being applied as quickly as possible and forget for the time being with respect to the second dose. Do you agree with that analysis, Mr. SORIOT? Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Van Overveld. I will go now to the four CEOs to answer the questions in 1 minute, please, and maybe a final word, short word, if you would like to add something. And I start, of course, with Mr. SORIOT.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me thank Mr. Zahardil for thanking us, because we have thousands of employees in all our companies working tirelessly to produce these vaccines, and words of encouragement are certainly very welcome, because it's very, very challenging for many of them. In terms of the export mechanism, we have implemented it as required by the Commission, and we have actually used it ourselves essentially to export samples to Mexico in that instance, and those samples are sent to Mexico simply to show that the vaccine is manufactured in Latin America is the same as the vaccine manufactured in Europe, so that they can then use our clinical data to get approval in those countries. So this is what we've done it for, and we are quite okay to use this mechanism. We understand fully that the EU wants to make sure that it protects itself in terms of getting access to the vaccine. And I'd like to repeat again, in our case, the overwhelming majority of what's made in the EU stays in the EU for EU consumption. In terms of the other question relative to the first dose, I totally agree, at least as it relates to our vaccine. I cannot comment for others, of course, but our data is very clear. And in fact, our data was confirmed by the real-life evidence in Scotland, with more than 1 million people vaccinated. After one single dose, 94% reduction of hospitalizations. So we see a very strong effect. In our clinical trials, after one dose, we see 100% protection against severe disease and hospitalization. And if you include moderate disease together with severe disease, the efficacy after one dose is 75%, and it goes up to 82% after the second dose given 3 months later. So yes, I think the strategy that has been pursued in the UK, which actually was based on data for our vaccine, actually is the right one, and has worked very, very well, because essentially from a public health viewpoint, you want to provide protection to as many people as possible. And then you give them the second dose later, 3 months later, and it enables you to use the quantity you have, which is limited, to protect as many people as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will go now quickly to Mr. BANCEL. Also, please, short intervention.
Thank you very much. So to the question from Mr. Van Overveld around investment in development, clinical trial and manufacturing, I cannot comment for the other companies, obviously, but I can tell you from Moderna, what happened is development, we were helped very much so by the US government. The BARDA agency gave us $1 billion to fund the clinical trial that has been used for approval in Europe as well, which is why, as I said in my remarks, I really congratulate Europe to setting the new agency to be able to fund research in infectious disease. I think it's very important for the future of the world and the future of Europe to have these collaborations. And we were able, as a company, to move very fast with BARDA, because we had been working with them before on the Zika vaccine that they were funding as well. And so we already had the trust and the relationship between the company and the agency. And so I really think that this new initiative in Europe is very positive, and we're going to do everything we can to help it as well. On the manufacturing front, in the case of Moderna, there was a different situation between Europe and the US. In the US, we already had a factory. And so we were able to produce in the US from that factory that existed before. In Europe, as I said earlier, we had no supply chain, no factory at all, because we had no commercial product. And so we tried to get some help, and we're not successful in getting help early in the year, last year, because it was a new technology. And so what we ended up doing is actually to raise money on the capital market by selling stock in the company to investors in May. We raised $1.3 billion that was used to invest in the equipment, hiring people, and the partnership we have in Europe, which is enabling us now to ship products to Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. HAAS.
Yes, thank you very much. With regard to the export control, yes, we have. This has been hitting us somehow because we couldn't get clinical trial material out to Latin America. This was, but on the other side, we did get then immediate support from the Commission as well as from the German authorities. For rather small companies, as we are, around about 600 people, certainly this adds an extra layer. But again, the support was there immediately. However, we lost a week then to ship the material, which was certainly necessary and is necessary for running the clinical trial. With regard to the waiver, yes, one has to consider, and this is also what I think my colleagues here also said, we have to see that it is not only about the manufacturing process where there is a lot of technology transfer needed in order to do this, know-how, which is in the brains of the people. And as a matter of fact, with all the 20 partners all over Europe, we are doing this is combined with a technology tech transfer. If one goes that way, one has to start also with the starting material and the equipment, which you need in order to facilitate that. And then there will be even more a higher competition on getting these material in order to get our vaccines produced. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Finally, Mr. Stan ERCK.
Yes, thank you. So we have established on 4 different continents the ability to make product so that we have not been impacted by borders so far. And we are assured we have been assured that the intent of the export mechanism being put in place is not to slow up product. I make the request to make sure that that happens, because it's critically important that all of the companies be able to ship product, clinical product, approved product, raw materials around the globe without delays put in place.
Thank you so much, Mr. Erck. I would like to thank to the four CEOs for their presence, for their availability, for their openness, for responding to the questions and for the commitments. And we go quickly to the second part with some delay, and we excuse for that. Three very important pharma companies with very distinguished and important representation, and one very relevant institution, a global institution. And I will start by giving the floor to Mr. Paul Stoffels, who is Vice Chair of the Executive Committee and Chief Scientific Officer, Johnson & Johnson. Mr. Stoffels, you have the floor. Just press the speak button. The interventions are kindly requested to be for 5 minutes to all distinguished guests. Please, you have the floor, Mr. Stoffels.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Canfin and Dr. Bussoy, Honorary Commissioner Kyriakides and Breton, honorary members of the Parliament and the committees. My name is Paul Stoffels. I'm a Belgian physician and the global leader for the COVID-19 vaccine project. First, I would like to provide you an update on the Johnson & Johnson approach to develop, produce and distribute the COVID-19 vaccine. Since 2011, Johnson & Johnson has invested heavily in vaccine research and development, including in our Ad26 vaccine vector technology, which we used to develop our Ebola vaccine, which received European Commission approval last year, and our Zika, RSV and HIV vaccine candidates. We conducted formulation work and stability studies showing the stability of our vaccine at 2 to 8 Celsius for several months. The company also invested in building highly specialized manufacturing capabilities required to produce these vaccines. These biologic and technological capabilities enable us to accelerate our efforts towards our COVID-19 vaccine rapidly. We began working on a vaccine candidate in January last year, as soon as the coronavirus sequence list first became available. We leveraged our technology, rapidly constructed multiple vaccine candidates, conducted extensive preclinical work, and began initial clinical trials in July last year in Europe. In mid-September, we launched our large-scale phase 3 pivotal trial in 45,000 volunteers, and last month we released our top-line interim data. The data showed that our single-dose vaccine addresses the most crucial healthcare needs in the pandemic: the prevention of severe COVID-19 disease and the prevention of hospitalization and death, 28 days post the vaccination with a single dose. And importantly, this result was achieved across countries with emerging variants, including the virulent B1351 variant first observed in South Africa. Based on these clinical trials, we submitted an application to the regulatory authorities seeking an emergency use application in the US, which will be reviewed by the FDA AdCom tomorrow, a conditional market authorization with EMA in Europe, and an emergency use listing with the WHO, all submitted already. During the same period, starting in March last year, we began expanding our manufacturing capabilities in parallel, building and scaling up capacity in the US, Europe, Africa, and Asia, with a goal to supply more than 1 billion doses of the vaccine globally by the end of this year on a not-for-profit basis during the pandemic. This was a major undertaking because manufacturing Adeno26-based vaccines in large quantities involves highly specialized and unique infrastructure and equipment, not readily available on the market at scale needed for the pandemic, as well as highly trained and experienced personnel. While we are moving fast, we have remained absolutely committed to making sure that the vaccine follows all guidelines with regard to good manufacturing practices and quality control. Let me now turn to the key question we are focused on today: how to increase the capacity of COVID-19 vaccine production to improve delivery. One answer: collaboration. We have been working around the clock to build 3 vaccine production plants in Europe, in the US, and Asia, and contract 7 fill and finish plants globally as part of a global supply network to deliver our commitments to the world. Due to the global interconnectivity of our production and supply chain processes, one batch of the J&J vaccine will likely pass to multiple countries through the course of various manufacturing stages in the journey from vaccine substance to finished vial for injection. To accelerate production, we have built our own plants as well as entered into agreements with established manufacturers to expand capacity. Last week, we announced an additional collaboration with Sanofi Pasteur as part of our global network to manufacturing. As these sites come online and our supply increases throughout the year, we are very confident that we will meet our 2021 commitment to the European Union of 200 million dosages. With a single dose, this translates to a potential to vaccinate 200 million people during the course of the year. As we make progress, we always keep in mind our long-standing commitment to ensuring widespread global access to our innovations. I also wanted to highlight that Johnson & Johnson announced an agreement in principle with Gavi to provide up to 500 million doses of our COVID-19 vaccine candidate to low-income countries via the COVAX facility. These doses will be distributed starting the second half of 2021 and continue to 2022, provided the vaccine candidate is, of course, proven to be safe and effective and approved by the WHO and local authorities. The unique manufacturing and filling capacity we need requires technical conversion of every site we have brought on board, which is on the critical path for each site to start up. We have assessed and filtered nearly 100 sites across the world, including 41 sites from Europe, based on specific criteria of feasibility, technical needs, volumes, and timelines. The large majority of the sites we surveyed would not be ready to produce vaccines before 2022. In the coming months, we are depending on a global supply chain network. That said, in July, we expect to have an end-to-end integrated European regional manufacturing network established as part of a global manufacturing network, which is always critical for business continuity. When we started developing a COVID-19 vaccine in January 2020, none of the specialized capacities that we needed for enabling supply in 2021 was available. The maximum number of vaccines we had manufactured with the existing capabilities was 2 million dosages of our Ebola vaccine for Africa. So this meant building brand new facility for drug substance that is now undergoing validation. In less than 1 year, we had to set up production and manufacturing capacity from the ground up. Different vaccine technologies require specific manufacturing capabilities.
Please, Dr. Stoffels,
yes.
Prepare to conclude.
Yes. The fill and finish is readily available. And finally, I want to thank the EU for the support and the significant contribution as a partner for Johnson & Johnson's ability to develop our vaccine at an accelerated pace. One more thank you for the European Medicines Agency for the 24/7 availability in guiding vaccine development. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stoffels. Thank you, and we are eagerly waiting the approval in the US and especially in EU for the vaccine. And I go now to Pfizer Group. We have together with us Madam Angela Huang, President Global Biopharm. She's accompanied by Mr. Germain Morin, Vice President Vaccine Supplies Chain. And I invite Madam Huang to take the floor, kindly. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Canfin, Chairman Boussoy, Commissioner Kyriakides, Commissioner Breton, and honorable members of the European Parliament. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Angela Wang, and I'm Group President of the Pfizer Biopharmaceuticals Group, and I worked here at Pfizer for 24 years. We are a global company, and in the first months of the pandemic, like you, I watched the reach of this virus spread from my colleagues in Asia to the cities in Europe, and finally to my home in America. As we watched the virus spread around the world, we came to understand quickly that this crisis is one that we all share and will only be defeated by collective resolve. From simple act of wearing masks to protect one another, to the sharing of medicines and supplies across the borders, the world has stepped up to this challenge, and Pfizer has committed to doing the same. We knew from the very beginning of the COVID-19 crisis that it would take both the power of science and the power of collaboration to defeat this virus, and that the two are deeply intertwined. And that is why, in March of 2020, Pfizer issued a 5-point plan calling for unprecedented industry collaboration in the fight against COVID-19. This included sharing tools and insights, marshalling our experts, applying our drug development expertise to help smaller biotech companies advance their most promising candidates, and offering our manufacturing capabilities and partnering with both the private and public sector to improve future rapid response. Pfizer has a best-in-industry supply network with 12 Pfizer-owned sites and over 80 supplies in Europe, and we implemented a comprehensive preparedness plan in our manufacturing site operations. Our first response came in March of 2020, when we saw a 200% rise in the need for ICU medicines to treat COVID-19 patients. We worked quickly to increase our supply. We shipped 17 critical medicines across Europe, working with governments, hospitals, and other healthcare institutions to ensure access to these essential medicines wherever they were needed. We also saw the need for a vaccine. And over the last 11 months, we combined our industry-leading vaccine development, manufacturing, and distribution capabilities with BioNTech's expertise in innovative mRNA technology to quickly scale, manufacture, and distribute large quantities of high-quality COVID-19 vaccine. Given the urgency of the pandemic, Pfizer self-funded more than $2 billion at risk to run clinical development and manufacturing processes in parallel and at scale. Collaborating closely with regulatory and health authorities around the world, we compressed timelines that typically take years into months, and those that take months into weeks. And as a result, we were able to move at the speed of science and make the seemingly impossible possible by delivering in less than a year the world's first COVID-19 vaccine. We have scaled our manufacturing operations. We made modifications to our production processes to increase yields. We've extended our production lines. We've added suppliers and global contract manufacturers everywhere to increase our total manufacturing capacity. And all of this is resulting in our ability to deliver more doses than we originally forecasted, with a newly stated global goal of 2 billion doses in 2021. It gives us great pride that 70% of those doses will be produced in Europe at BioNTech's manufacturing sites in Germany and at Pfizer's state-of-the-art manufacturing site in Puurs, Belgium. As of the 22nd of February, our vaccine is available in 64 countries, including all EU member states, with 31 million doses shipped in the EU and deliveries accelerating every month. What's more, we have a 99.9% success rate in all of our vaccine shipments. For the EU, Pfizer is fulfilling our dose deliveries in line with agreed schedules. We've committed to delivering 500 million doses to the EU in 2021, with quantities increasing every month, including a tripling of doses in Q2 compared with Q1. We are working closely with governments and NGOs to ensure that those who most urgently need our vaccine can get it. This includes our recent agreement with the COVAX facility to distribute vaccines to developing countries. In fact, 36% of our global allocation is directed towards the low and middle income countries. But we know that the COVID-19 crisis is far from over, and we will continue to move at the speed of science to bring it under control. We have ongoing studies to assess vaccine effectiveness against variants with the key mutations from the UK strain and the South African strains. We are conducting studies for children between 12 to 15 years old, and we've recently initiated safety and efficacy evaluations for pregnant women. In conclusion, I would like to express Pfizer's sincere thanks to the 46,000 trial participants, the hundreds of investigators, and the thousands of Pfizer and BioNTech scientists, clinicians, and manufacturing professionals, especially our colleagues based in Puurs, who worked literally day and night for almost a year now knowing that every moment matters. I would also like to share my appreciation of the close working relationship with the European Parliament, the European Commission, the EU member states, regulators, and other key stakeholders. And finally, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We move to the third panelist, and Thomas Triomphe, Executive Vice President, Head of Sanofi Pasteur.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Dear Mr. Canfin, dear Mr. Boussoy, honorable members of the European Parliament, thank you very much for inviting me today and for the opportunity to share Sanofi views on how to increase COVID-19 vaccine production capacities in Europe. 5 months ago, I was here with you sharing all the efforts we are doing to develop and produce vaccines against COVID-19 and to ensure wide access to those. Our engagement has not changed. We are committed since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic to play our part through developing and manufacturing our own vaccines with 2 different technological platforms, the adjuvanted recombinant protein vaccine with our partner GSK and the mRNA vaccine with our partner Translate Bio. We have faced bumps on the road with the results of our phase 1, phase 2 trial last December, which required us to rethink our development plan, taking into account the efficacy of the vaccines being approved and the evolving epidemiology. Together with GSK, we announced the initiation of our new phase 2 study to enable us to identify the final vaccine formulation for adults of all ages. We are confident that our vaccine has strong potential. Encouraged by the good preclinical data obtained, we look forward to further progressing this vaccine candidate into phase 3 in Q2 of this year for approval in Q4 of 2021. But you might ask yourself, isn't that too late? Do we even need new COVID-19 vaccines? The fact is that many unknowns remain on the evolution of this pandemic and of this virus. Member States and the Commission are rightly turning their attention to the issues of variants. We strongly believe that our adjuvanted recombinant vaccine will bring value to public health, as it will support a diversified portfolio of technologies available in Europe with trusted and established platforms. And second, it will provide further clinical efficacy against variants that are circulating at the time of the new phase 3 we're going to launch in Q2 2021. Our confidence is reinforced by the recent results from a phase 3 trial with the adjuvanted recombinant protein vaccine from Novavax, which we've just heard before. We show that this technology can bring high vaccine efficacy against a broad scope of COVID-19 variants circulating. We will confirm this with our forthcoming phase 3 trial. Broadening the scope of vaccines available maximizes the chances to prevent, mitigate, and respond to potential impact of variants. Latest epidemiological findings seem to demonstrate that the virus will continue to evolve, meaning that our goal is to sustain a scope of preventive vaccination options that can holistically address the virus evolution, a bit similarly to flu, if you wish. Coming back now to the capacity of COVID-19 vaccine production. As you know, Sanofi has a strong industrial capacity in Europe, and we have decided to support BioNTech and Johnson & Johnson in manufacturing their vaccines in Europe, in our German and French sites respectively. We are also in the process of significantly ramping up our European capacity to manufacture our adjuvanted recombinant protein vaccine, and the support of the European Union to these efforts is absolutely critical. Developing and producing 100 million of doses in a couple of months brings major challenges, with important gaps that cannot be solved in a single day. In this regard, it's critical to have a structure in Europe allowing more permanent and well-resourced capacity for public and private collaborations in the field of response and preparedness to major public health crises. The recently announced HERA incubator and the future European Authority HERA go both in the right direction. To succeed in turning these ideas into reality, we need political will and substantial investment into expertise and resources at the right scale. Sanofi strongly supports the proposal of immediate and longer-term flexible manufacturing capacity for vaccines and medicines. Last June, as you know, we announced €500 million investment in the creation of an evolutive facility, state-of-the-art industrial site in France that will use in the future the latest innovative vaccine production technology. Sanofi is therefore well engaged in building such collaboration and the needed industrial capacity. But beyond industrial production capacity, I'd like to stress the importance of having the development and regulatory framework adapted for next generation, second waves of COVID-19 vaccines. Regulators such as EMA, FDA are doing a fantastic job in adapting the regulatory procedures to accelerate the approval of COVID-19 vaccines to the new variants. However, it focuses only on the already approved vaccines. Our phase 3 study will probably be the last one, ethically possible, with an efficacy study design. Therefore, we absolutely need international regulators to propose a path forward for developers to enable the use of alternative study designs and or so-called correlate of protection, so that we have more vaccines available in 22 and beyond with more producers. We need the EU to facilitate this work as a key enabler for supply security globally. Last but not least, I'd like to address the topic of liability, which was central in the hearing back a few months ago. Let me repeat that we need countries to set up non-fault compensation systems to ensure that people who suffer adverse events attributable to COVID-19 vaccines will get appropriate and timely compensation without having to resort to lengthy, costly litigations with uncertain outcomes. WHO just announced, and that's a very good news, the first and only global vaccine injury compensation mechanism covering 92 low and middle income countries eligible to COVAX. I congratulate the COVAX facility for that. In Europe to date, only 11 countries have such systems in place. It is urgent for the others to move to protect all actors involved in vaccination, including patients, governments, healthcare providers, distributors, and manufacturers. With this, I thank you very much again for your invitation, and I hand over to our chairs, Mr. Confin and Mr. Boussoy, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Triomphe. So we move to the last speaker for the second panel, Thierry Moon, co-director of the Global Health Center based in Geneva. Okay. Right.
Let me just wait for the...
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, can you see the slides? Here we go. Okay. I have a very simple message for the honorable members of the Parliament, which is that we need to make a bigger pie. And the question is really how to do that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay. Thank you. I think, unfortunately, what we have seen over the last year is that countries have been fighting over a very small piece of the pie. And you can see that all the arrows are really pointing in the same direction. We need to expand global vaccine production capacity for epidemiological, ethical, and economic reasons. This is very much in the self-interest of Europe, and it's also a way for Europe to show solidarity with the world. Currently, we don't even have enough doses to supply the COVAX facility, which has been strongly supported by Europe. Next slide, please. I think the rationale for why we need to expand global production capacity is clear, but the how might not be as obvious. And I'd like to offer you 4 ingredients that are needed to bake this bigger pie. The first is better intelligence on production. We need clearer real-time information on what kind of production capacities we have. We looked at 65 manufacturing agreements that are available in the public domain, and we still cannot develop a clear picture of volumes, timelines, technology types or stage of production, locations, what kind of technology has been transferred, what has actually been produced, by which I mean output, and where the bottlenecks are. Governments can and should require this kind of information to be disclosed via contracts, and we've seen that some contracts, in fact, have required this information. Next slide, please. The reason that governments can ask for this information is because they have quite a lot of leverage, and that's because governments have been co-producing COVID-19 vaccines, have de-risked and subsidized every step of the process, from research and development, the regulatory approval, which has been accelerated through subsidizing production in many cases, procurement, and even taking on liability in a number of cases. Next slide, please. What you see here is our estimate, and this is again an estimate based on publicly available information of where that leverage might be used. So on the left-hand side, you see investments in research and development of COVID-19 vaccines, with the European Union and its member states having invested approximately 1.5 billion euros. In the middle, you should have a picture of subsidies for manufacturing, but the data is very, very poor on this. We really need more transparency here. But on the right-hand side, what you see again is an estimate of how much is being spent on procurement. And you can see that the European Commission is the single largest customer, and according to our estimates, has now put on the table 21.7 billion euros. So there's a way to use this leverage both at the beginning as an at-risk investor in R&D and at the end of the process as the single largest world's consumer of these goods to actually get more information on production capacities from companies. Next slide, please. The next ingredient is that we really need to expand technology transfer. So far, there's been little incentive to do so, lots of barriers, and it should not be a surprise that technology transfer has been far too limited. What we have heard from every single speaker from industry up until now is that this is feasible. They've all been doing it for the last year. We've also heard that some firms are much more willing than others. I think that it's very important to try to move as quickly as possible. We are in the middle of a global emergency, and anything we can do to facilitate and accelerate production should be adopted, including, of course, the temporary waiver on COVID-19 intellectual property protection being debated at the WTO, where Europe has unfortunately been opposed and has blocked the adoption of this waiver up until now. We know that market incentives are not aligned, and we're not going to magically get technology transfer. We're not going to magically get enough production of the right vaccines to actually meet global need. Every country is at risk of being a victim of export restrictions, and we know that there are a lot of bottlenecks that governments need to help resolve. Next slide, please. What you can see here is just a picture of the number of agreements that companies have adopted to try to expand manufacturing capacity since March 2020. And I think you can see, indeed, companies have been very active in expanding capacity, and further expansion should be possible. Next slide, please. The fourth and last ingredient is public stewardship, which is absolutely essential. We know that COVID may become endemic. We don't know the duration of immunity. We know it's mutating. And this means that we need to not only adopt vaccines, but also that people may need to be revaccinated over and over again. All of this translates into a huge and lucrative commercial market. This actually creates disincentives to expand production today because companies want to control their technologies. For example, the mRNA platform is extremely lucrative for a number of other indications beyond COVID. We know some companies have an incentive to increase their own supply to increase sales, but only under monopoly conditions. What companies actually do will be, of course, shaped profoundly by the policies that governments adopt. Governments have also historically played a very central role in ensuring technology transfer and should do so again today. Next slide, please. Public stewardship is also essential because we have very many significant risks that remain in terms of we don't know how COVID-19 will fluctuate. We don't know what the new variants will look like. And what has not gotten enough attention today is in this mad rush to earn a profit on COVID-19 vaccines, we're at high risk of creating shortages of other essential vaccines needed, for example, to prevent childhood illness. In order to prevent this type of public health disaster, we need strong, steady public stewardship, both at the European level, but also in order to expand production worldwide. The HERA incubator, I believe, is a very important step in this direction, but it should be looking not only to produce within Europe, but in fact to ensure that all countries are able to manufacture, or all countries are able to access manufactured goods, Many middle-income countries are very interested in doing so. Many governments now recognize the strong national security interest in having some kind of vaccine production capacity in their own regions, and I think Europe will find many willing partners. Next slide.
Please try to
I'd like
conclude
to
kindly.
just conclude. Thank you. 3 quick conclusions. We need more transparency, much better intelligence on production. We can get that intelligence because the public sector has tremendous leverage if it wants to use it. It also has responsibility and capacity to expand that production. But this production must not only meet European needs, it must meet global needs. And at the end of the day, this will protect European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. After a very interesting exchange of views and very interactive, we are still 50 minutes delay, so we will not get catch the eye, will not take catch the eye, and also we'll try to accelerate a little bit. We'll have 4 interventions and then the answers. And once again, please indicate to which you address the question. And we start the interaction with European Parliament members, and I start with Mr. Peter Liese, coordinator of EPP NV.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all speakers. The development of the COVID-19 vaccine in record time was really a great success of public-private partnership. But now we have a problem because delivery is not fast enough and Europeans are waiting for the vaccine. It is said that the European Union gets the vaccine later because we ordered later, but when you look at other countries, that's just not true. Canada ordered earlier, they get the vaccine later, they have less vaccination than the European Union. Israel ordered later, they get it first, they have a special deal. But besides this special deal of Israel, the main point is that those that have an export ban like the US or similar restrictions like the UK, they are better served. So my question to Mrs. Wang from Pfizer, is Pfizer ready to engage with Joe Biden, Boris Johnson and Mr. SORIOT to stop their UK and US first policy, or are you otherwise prepared for an EU export ban for your product? And a short question only to Mr. Stoffels. You have a good vaccine. It will be approved soon. Your benchmark should be BioNTech Pfizer. They delivered the vaccine a few days after approval, even though there was Christmas time. Is that your benchmark? Or are you following AstraZeneca, and are you prepared for the shitstorm that will arrive for Johnson & Johnson if you don't deliver? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liese. I go now to Mr. Nicolás González Casares, please.
Gracias, presidentes. Gracias a todos los representantes de las compañías y gracias a todos los que han contribuido al éxito global de las vacunas. Pero ahora tenemos que llevársela a los europeos y europeas y a todos los ciudadanos del mundo. Entonces, mis preguntas primero para Johnson & Johnson. Su vacuna es muy importante para cumplir el 70% de vacunación en la Unión Europea. Es crucial. Lo que hemos visto en los contratos es que ustedes se comprometían a cumplir y a expandir la producción. Yo sé, por la producción, que si ustedes cumplen, llegaremos a ese 70%, por lo que ponen los contratos. ¿Se comprometen de verdad a hacerlo? Y, por último, para Pfizer y BioNTech, las nuevas variantes son un problema, pero su tecnología es muy adaptativa. ¿Cuánto tiempo estiman que pueden tardar en adaptar su vacuna a una nueva cepa y empezar a producir vacunas para esa nueva cepa? Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Je donne la parole maintenant à Madame Véronique Trier-Lenoir, s'il vous plaît. Oui, juste pour vous... Ok, c'est déjà la première. Parce que la raise hand. Ah, ok, je vous en prie.
Je suis là. Merci beaucoup. En tant que médecin et en tant que vice-coordinatrice Renew pour la commission Envie, je tiens d'abord à vous remercier pour votre présence aujourd'hui. J'espère qu'à l'avenir, les coopérations et les accords entre les laboratoires pharmaceutiques se poursuivront dans le cadre de la production de vaccins, mais aussi, pourquoi pas, les substances actives et les médicaments. Nous attendons tous ERA, vous l'avez beaucoup dit, mais ici et maintenant, nous devons tout faire pour faciliter la mise en place d'un réseau européen d'entreprises pour augmenter la production de vaccins. Alors, 1 minute, une question, elle s'adresse aux 3 firmes, mais je la poserai à Madame Wang, sur le modèle prometteur de l'Alliance européenne des batteries, qui recoupe aujourd'hui des industriels et des États membres. Est-ce que vous seriez disposé aujourd'hui à participer activement et collectivement à ce que nous appelons un projet important d'intérêt européen commun, European Cluster Collaboration Platform, autour des vaccins Covid? Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. I would like to invite Madame Dolores Montserrat, former Minister of Health in Spain.
Thank you very much. La COVID-19 con sus variantes, por desgracia, ha llegado para quedarse mucho tiempo. Por ello, es necesario aumentar la producción de vacunas y la industria farmacéutica se ha demostrado ser un sector estratégico para la salud pública de todos. Europa es líder en investigación y en ensayos clínicos, pero la fabricación, la producción a gran escala nos ha hecho dependientes de otros países, sobre todo asiáticos. Mis preguntas son para la señora Angela Wang. Europa debe ser atractiva a la inversión para el desarrollo y la fabricación farmacéutica, así como atraer a las empresas auxiliares de este sector. Y quiero saber su opinión. ¿Cómo puede Europa ser más atractiva para tener cadenas de producción más estables, empresas auxiliares con capacidad para afrontar cualquier pandemia o desafío de salud global? Global. Y la segunda pregunta, ¿considera que un sistema de incentivos como incentivos fiscales para la producción, incentivos a una nueva tecnología, incentivos a las empresas auxiliares nos ayudaría a que las cadenas de producción en Europa sean más estables y, por tanto, con más capacidad de producción?
Thank you so much. I go first to Madame Huang. Many questions addressed to her, and then to Dr. Stoffels. Madame Huang.
Your questions. Thank you for your questions. I'll take the first one regarding the export bans and our work with the US and the UK and the supply of their vaccines. I want to reiterate that our supply and the delivery schedule of our vaccines everywhere around the world, regardless of which country it is all based on our supply agreements and the contracts that were created with each one of these entities. In addition to that, early stage, it was the timing of all of the deliveries were also affected by the timing of the approvals of the vaccines. And we know that both for the UK as well as for Israel as well as for the US, these approvals came early in December, and therefore the delivery schedules followed the approvals of those particular countries. But further to your question of export bans, we are not in favor of that. And the reason is that we have seen through this pandemic and seen through the success of our own vaccine that it was reliant on a complex web of collaborations throughout the world. Just to put this in context, our vaccine uses 280 materials from 86 different supply sites across 19 different countries. And therefore, the ability for us to have a successful vaccine production relies on our ability to have open trade channels and to be able to import and export around the world. And so our efforts are deeply focused on ensuring that we keep these lines open, and that in the end, it's about ensuring that we can access the network to ensure that we can get the raw materials that we need, but also products that we need from around the world also need to be able to move freely across different countries. Just a reminder that earlier in the pandemic, in March, when the need for ICU medicines became very significant in Europe, we were able to actually import. I was able to move product both from our Asia sites as well as from our US sites over to Europe to be able to supply essential medicines. And so Pfizer really stands behind a trade system that is open and that allows us to import and export freely. The second question, I think, was related to, are we committed to expanding production? And are we committed in particular because the variants are a problem, and how much time would we need? So let me reassure everybody that we are here at Pfizer deeply, deeply committed to expanding our production. We started at a production plan of 1.3 billion doses for the world. You just heard me say in our statement that we have now increased that to 2 billion globally. Of that 2 billion, a large majority of that is coming from Puurs in Belgium. And this is our largest site in Pfizer, in the Pfizer network, and is our largest vaccine producing site. So a great deal of investment and a great deal of effort is focused on that. And the reason we are doing this is because we know that the world needs more doses, and it needs more doses now, but we also need to be ready for the variants. And so the manufacturing improvements that we purposely made in January so that we could upgrade our systems to deliver the 2 billion doses were very, very important. Every single day, we are able to increase our production, and every month that improves, so much so that by June of this year, Puurs will be delivering 100 million doses per month, and it increases throughout the year. And just to give you a sense of...
Kind request to concentrate, because we will have still many questions to come.
Okay, well then let's move to then the next question, which is, just to finish off on the variants, how much time do we need? Based on the mRNA technology, we believe that we need approximately 100 days to be able to produce a new vaccine. Obviously, this needs to factor in regulatory discussions and regulatory approvals, which are in the hands of our regulators. And then as it pertains to our willingness to participate in common platforms for vaccine production, I think here, just to emphasize that Pfizer is deeply invested in making sure that our vaccine is accessible to anybody and everyone in the world. But the way to do that is to ensure that we have a vibrant IP system and a strong intellectual property platform whereby we can develop our innovations. It is in fact indeed the whole reason why we were able to collaborate with BioNTech, collaborate with all of these suppliers so quickly so that we could come up to speed to developing as well as manufacturing our vaccine. So we will continue to do so. And finally, I think there was a question around how to ensure that our supply chains continue to be stable. Actually, I think that the plans that we just made in Puurs recently to increase different aspects of our supply chain, as well as expand our fill finish, expand our formulation capacity, improvements in our yield are all a demonstration and evidence of the stability of our supply chain. And so with additional raw materials, human resources, machinery, all of those is all that we need to be able to make more. We don't have an infrastructure and we don't have a know-how problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dr. Stoffels, please.
With regard to our production process, it's a very complicated, different production process where you have a vaccine, a live, non-replicating vaccine produced on a cell line, and then filled in sterile conditions under BSL-2. And so in the US, we had access to an existing facility with the US government already built 8 years ago, as part of a program which we were doing with them on developing vaccines for Ebola, Zika, HIV. And we also had access to existing facilities for BSL-2 filling. In Europe, we had our own facility at lower capacity. We started building a new downstream April last year, new buildings, huge work. It's in the making. It's almost done. And so we had no facilities to fill the BSL-2 live virus. And so we now have a network in the world which can do both and will be able to deliver on our 1 billion, 200 million to the Commission, and will work with the discussion platform between countries and the industry to get a more detailed supply schedule as we progress to our approval. On the variants, tomorrow you will hear at the advisory panel, and we made that public, that a vaccine which we extensively tested in South Africa, when it comes to the severe disease, it has no different than in the West, and we protect it highly against severe disease, death and hospitalization, even with the variants. On the research, I think it comes down to long-term commitment for innovation. On the one hand, on R&D, on the other hand, on manufacturing capacity, and especially in pandemic preparedness, you don't know what's going to happen. So multiple vaccine innovation needs to happen, as well as preparedness for pandemic and production. and transferring technology. We are transferring technology to India. And if we get our 3 manufacturing plants up, this year we can deliver 1 billion. Next year we can deliver more than 2.5 billion vaccines to the world. 1 dose, 1 person. So that means large capacity to vaccinate the world in the next 2 years.
Thank you. So we move now to the next 4 questions, starting with Michel Rivasi for the Greens for 1 minute.
Merci, messieurs les présidents. Merci d'être là au niveau des laboratoires. Moi, j'ai 2 questions. D'abord, sur la transparence des contrats. Je voudrais, ma question s'adresse à Johnson & Johnson et à Pfizer. Pourquoi ces contrats ne sont pas publics? Quand vous avez signé avec la Commission, pourquoi on ne peut pas les avoir en ligne? Alors qu'aux États-Unis, ils sont accessibles en ligne. Donc, je veux vraiment une réponse précise. Deuxième question, on a parlé de plateforme. Vous voyez qu'il y a 7,8 milliards d'habitants sur la planète. C'est une pandémie mondiale. Vous parlez de 1 milliard de doses en 2021, 2 milliards dans le cas de Pfizer. Mais ça ne répond pas à la pandémie. Alors, est-ce que vous pourriez vous engager pour mettre à la fois pour suspendre vos brevets et pour transférer votre savoir-faire sur la plateforme CITAP de l'OMS? Et ainsi, ça pourrait vraiment multiplier la production dans le monde. Il y a des pays comme l'Afrique du Sud, il y a des pays comme l'Inde qui pourraient faire cette production si vous suspendez vos brevets et si vous transférez votre savoir-faire. Et je voudrais une question précise là-dessus, enfin une réponse précise là-dessus.
Merci. Patricia Toia for SND.
Mi rivolgo a Pfizer. So che state facendo il massimo, l'avete detto e vi crediamo, e state facendo anche delle buone cooperazioni produttive a livello di aziende a titolo volontario, ma questo non basta, lo riconosciamo tutti noi colleghi, in termini di quantità di dosi necessarie nell'immediato e in futuro e in termini anche di velocità, perché il tempo vuol dire vita o morte delle persone e dell'economia. Noi siamo responsabili pubblici, dobbiamo soddisfare il diritto alla salute dei cittadini e dunque abbiamo il dovere morale di guardare tutte le opzioni possibili sul tavolo. Vi chiediamo la vostra collaborazione. Se noi arriviamo per necessità anche alla sospensione dei brevetti e anche alle licenze obbligatorie, troveremo la vostra collaborazione, non è contro di voi, ma il fatto che noi dobbiamo soddisfare un'esigenza immediata che è un diritto. E quando parlo di brevetti non parlo solo di formule, parlo di capacità tecnologiche, parlo anche di formazione, cioè tutto quello che consente di moltiplicare i siti produttivi, perché questo è indispensabile nel breve e nel medio termine. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Bernier Weiss for EPP.
Thank you so much. The upcoming months will define the forthcoming years of the EU when it comes to vaccines and the framework conditions for the pharma sector in the EU. However, I do not hope that we will redefine these frameworks conditions compared to what we have today. Of course, EU have been challenged during the COVID-19 crisis, and we should do our utmost to prevent such a situation in the future. But are export bans, nationalisation and more control over the EU pharma companies really a way to go? I think no. My question goes to Pfizer. How do you suggest that we should work together in the future in order to overcome the challenges of tomorrow? Would a stronger focus on public and private partnerships with efficient licensing models to maximize use of production capacity be a method to ensure a resilient EU when it comes to the threat of future pandemics, while preserving our European principles, which is market-based and open to the global supply chains and the world around us? I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question for this group, Marcus Buchet for ID.
Could you please press the speak button?
Once again. Okay, great. Herzliches Dankeschön an die Industrie, heute hier bei uns sein zu wollen und ihre Bereitschaft, zu erklären, mit uns zu sprechen. Meine Frage geht an die Firma Pfizer. Ich habe explizit heute gelesen, dass es zu Engpässen auf Seite der Zulieferer gekommen wäre. Meine Frage bezieht sich also auch auf die Resilienz. Welche Möglichkeiten schlagen Sie vor, um in diesem Bereich besser gewappnet zu sein für mögliche künftige Pandemien? Das Spezifische ist also, um welche Engpässe ging es denn hier von Seiten von BioNTech eigentlich? Welche Produkte waren damals problematisch in der ersten Phase der Belieferung Ihrer Fabriken? Dankeschön.
Thank you. So we move to the answers, starting with Angela Huang from Pfizer.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. I'll take them one by one. Okay, first one around contracts and making them public. So first of all, I want to emphasize that Pfizer is very much in favor of transparency, and we have engaged in an unprecedented level of transparency throughout the development process. It began with the publications of the work that we were doing in our clinical trials and sharing the data as soon as we had them. We published quickly, and to the fact that we even published in preprint servers and made our data available so that people could access them as quickly as possible and online. And so that has been our principle from the beginning, including how we are sharing information about our dose deliveries and our schedules so that planning and logistics can take place. I think it's important to note, though, that the contracts that we sign and under which these the dose deliveries are based are confidential with each country that we have signed them with. And Pfizer respects the confidentiality of these countries. And the reason this is important is for two reasons. I mean, first of all, we're still in discussions with many, many countries, and we have ongoing negotiations. So we have to make sure that there is not information that can be used throughout the negotiations that it could either compromise us or color the negotiations for a particular country. In the contracts are also certain information around our product and our methodology, our manufacturing methodology, which is private. Otherwise, it would compromise our competitiveness in the market. So what we have done instead is to work with the European Commission to provide, and we're working with them right now, to provide a redacted version of this contract so that the information that the public should have access to, they can, and that the information that is proprietary to the company or out of respect for different governments, because every contract looks a little different depending on what the government wants, that we honor the confidentiality of the governments. The second question was around the desperate need for more doses and whether we would commit to suspending patents. Again, just to remind everyone that it was because of a strong patent system that we were even able to manufacture and develop this vaccine in the first place. And as we've just talked about, the crisis is not over. We have variants that are coming. We need to continue to do our research and continue to understand, what it is that we need to do to manage the new variants or manage future diseases. And so it is really important to us that we uphold very strictly our IP foundation and ensure that the IP network is strong. That doesn't mean, though, that we don't, and that would get in the way of us providing access to our vaccine to everyone who needs it. And in fact, just to reinforce, our issue right now is not know-how and it's not infrastructure. We have figured all of that out to the point where we were able to go from 1.3 billion doses to 2. We are now every single day looking at how we can make more. The issue you also have to remember is that there are a lot of ancillary things that are required to make this vaccine, like raw materials. Very much in the beginning, and we talked about this earlier in the hearing today as well, that this is all de novo. We've never made an mRNA vaccine before. We need lipids. Just as an example, and lipids were not readily available. So I think we need to think broader than when we talk about vaccine production, we need to think broadly about what are all the components that are required, where they come from, and how can we ensure that we have an active supply of all of those things.
Thank you. I'm very sorry, but if you could go to your conclusion in 30 seconds.
Yep. The last question was around bottlenecks to supply chains. I think it's, my conclusion there is that having an open trade system that allows us to import, export, whether it's product or raw materials, is what we need to ensure that we have a robust supply chain here in Europe.
Thank you very much. There were two questions to Johnson & Johnson. Mr. Stoffels.
Yeah. Want to first on contract transparency. We have our contracts available with minimal redaction, so I think that is very clear that we are transparent in everything we do with minimal redaction. For me, the availability of vaccines at the moment, the best chance for the world to get fully vaccinated is focusing on all the vaccines which are there. There are several viral vector vaccines, mRNA and protein vaccines. If all these companies with all their capabilities like us, we focus on getting it done, there will be vaccines for the entire world. And making that happen with the capabilities of the existing companies and their experience is the highest chance to get there. So any tech transfer starting from the ground with regard to technology we have will take 1 to 2 years, at least one, most of the time 2. From the 100 facilities we checked in the world, most of them could not deliver any vaccine before 2022. And that is where focusing now with the highly technical and specialized people on what we do to make sure we maximize capacity. And at the moment, we do it not for profit for the pandemic. So there will be no benefit using our people at the moment to transfer technology around the world because it will not be productive for more vaccines.
Thank you. And we move to Thomas Trion for Sanofi. Okay, so we...
Could you please press the speak button?
Okay, so we move to the next set of questions and we'll be back to Sanofi later on.
We'll take the whole interventions together because we have also our esteemed and important commissioner, Thierry Breton, which will have to address us. And the next speaker is Mr. Alexandre Vondra. 1 minute.
Thank you very much. So my question goes to Angela Wang from Pfizer. Congratulations, it's a huge success in a record time, and it had to cost a lot of money, especially in the R&D. And can you give us a rough comparison in the rough numbers, how much you were able to raise in the United States, including the capital market on one hand, and in the EU or EU member states, including BioNTech on the other hand? And secondly, Israeli program is a huge success, and it's my understanding that it was possible also due to the high level of digitalization in the Israeli healthcare. Given the fact that in the EU, the digitalization in the healthcare is just in a stony age, is there anything you would advise us to do in our reforming attempts in the healthcare, to work with the data and so on, to be prepared next time for the similar situation?
Thank you so much, Monsieur Dominique Riquet.
Oui, voilà. Une question pour Madame Wang. Merci pour l'invitation et au CEO de s'exprimer. Une question pour Madame Wang qui a été posée par Monsieur Gonzalez et à laquelle elle n'a pas répondu. En cas de nouveaux variants résistants en technique de base ARN, à votre avis, combien de temps faudrait-il à peu près pour trouver une solution industrielle ou à l'échelle industrielle pour répondre aux problèmes? Et pour Monsieur Stoffel, une autre question. On a vu qu'il était extrêmement complexe, long, que ça coûtait sur le plan capitalistique de mettre en place une chaîne de production pour de nouveaux vaccins à une échelle pandémique mondiale. Combien de temps pensez-vous maintenir une chaîne dédiée au Covid? Alors, je pense que ça dépendra de la durée de l'épidémie, mais ça peut aussi être fonction de vos plans. Deuxièmement, est-ce que ça a pu avoir une incidence sur vos capacités techniques, en ressources humaines et capitalistiques concernant d'autres réponses thérapeutiques à d'autres problèmes pathologiques qui pourraient être posés, soit en termes d'épidémie, de pandémie, ou sur d'autres catégories médicamenteuses?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Riquet. Sarah Serdas, the next speaker.
Thank you, Chairs. I have a question for Pfizer. What are the possibilities of increasing production capacity by having it being done together with university and research institutes? Is this something that has been discussed? And if you are putting this on the table together with the different universities and institutions concerning storage capacity, I have a question that there has been some information that showed that there's not much loss of efficiency when stored in higher temperatures than those that are done at the beginning, those initially recommended. Can you confirm this? And as this will have severe impacts on the distribution, especially for low and middle income countries where lower temperature storage are much more difficult to obtain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Christoph Hansen, the next speaker.
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for those who have already published the contracts. I think it's very important that the EU citizens knows where his money goes to. But on the other hand, I think this is not helping to enhance production, neither does it slow down production. So we should focus on what is really helping, and therefore we know, of course, no export restrictions as well for the components of the vaccine have been a problem. So the lipids and the molecules that you need. So do you have an estimation how much delay you got in production because of products, first material that you didn't get on time? And then there is a lot of the idea of reshoring production to the EU going around. Personally, I don't share this. What would you reply to those who want to reshore production to the European Union? And third question, what other irritants do you see at international trade level that could be removed to help you to produce faster? Personally, I very much agree on those who have said that Mrs. Wang has said this, that we need open markets for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Mark Botenga.
Dank u wel. Eerste vraag aan Pfizer. U legt de nadruk op hoe belangrijk patenten zijn. Nu, technologie werd ontwikkeld met publieke subsidies, niet door patenten. Pfizer voorziet vandaag dit jaar 15 miljard extra inkomsten, winstmarge 30%. De CEO van Astrazeneca kreeg dan weer $21,5 miljoen uitbetaald zo net. Het lijkt eigenlijk alsof het enige dat in deze crisis geen vertraging heeft, dat uw winst en uw inkomsten zijn. En die winst maakt u door patenten, door te weigeren de technologie te delen. En daardoor gebruiken we vandaag slechts 43% van de globale vaccinproductiecapaciteit. Deel die technologie en dan kunnen we sneller meer vaccins produceren. Mijn vraag is simpel. Bent u bereid de volksgezondheid voorrang te geven op uw inkomsten, op uw winst en de belangen van uw aandeelhouders? Als ja, patent vrijgeven en technologie delen via de Wereldgezondheidsorganisaties? Ja en nee, waarom? Ten tweede, heeft u bij Pfizer, u wordt beschuldigd van chantage tegenover bepaalde landen, die zouden ambassades moeten hypothekeren om uw vaccin te kunnen kopen. Klopt dat? Ja of nee? Dank u wel.
Thank you so much, Madame Maria Carvalho. Next speaker.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is to Mrs. Wang from Pfizer. Preliminary results on real-world data from Israel are very encouraging, and good results with a scenario about 80% of cases caused by the so-called UK strain of the virus. Of course, we need to wait for the detailed analysis of this data and the peer review report. This is just data that I got in the internet and reports. Anyway, I would like to ask if Mrs. Wang, if you have already early evidence that you can share with us about the real world data and about other strains of the virus, the so-called South African, Brazil, and also different groups of population. How is the results, different ages,
and also groups with chronic diseases. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Carvalho. Next speaker, Madam Romana Jerkovic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the presenters of today. It was very interesting and informative. You know, at the end of the discussion, it's clear, despite all the efforts, we continue to face significant risk and bottlenecks in the production and distribution of vaccines. And moreover, new virus strains such as the UK one are further putting into question efficiency of existing vaccines. It's hard at the end of the discussion to address something that hasn't been touched on already today. We are all devoted and focused on solving the most crucial issues. I was interested very much in the same question as already Sarah Cerdas posed. So the question goes to Pfizer and Mr. Huang. What about the efficiency of the vaccine when stored in higher temperatures than those initially indicated? Is it true? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rasmus Andresen. Rasmus? Just press once the speak button. It's okay.
Please press the speak button once.
Yes, now I would like to address my questions to Pfizer. First of all, I would like to mention that together with BioNTech, you received a lot of public money. You got 100 million from the EIB, at least 375 million from the German government. And for us, this means that you have a special or a high responsibility also when it comes to transparency. And as I understood, you are agreeing on publishing the contract now. This is really good, but I would like to hear a little bit more on which parts of the contract you would like to see reducted. You have developed the vaccines with public money, and I think the European citizens have a right to get all of the information about the contracts. And the second question is it true that you asked Latin American governments, like journalists are reporting, to put sovereign assets like public infrastructure or buildings as a guarantee for their vaccine contracts? If you haven't done that, then please confirm this. If not,
thank you. Thank you so much, Rasmus. Last on the list, Antoni Comini Olivares. Please, you have the floor.
Sí, thank you, Mr. Chair. A la señora Wang de Pfizer le querría hacer la siguiente pregunta. Ella ha defendido que es necesario un sistema de propiedad intelectual robusto, pero en esta ocasión el nivel de riesgo que han tenido que asumir las compañías para desarrollar sus vacunas es inferior, muy inferior al de un proceso de desarrollo habitual. ¿Por qué? Porque ha habido unos contratos de precompra por parte de la Comisión Europea que han supuesto decenas de millones de euros y, por tanto, había un grado de riesgo muy inferior al habitual. Y, por tanto, si la propiedad intelectual está para compensar el riesgo que asumen las compañías cuando desarrollan una vacuna, en este caso no se puede aspirar al mismo nivel de protección de la propiedad intelectual porque no ha habido el mismo nivel de riesgo. Por tanto, vamos a asumir que estas son vacunas financiadas parcialmente con fondos públicos y que, por tanto, no se puede pretender proteger la propiedad intelectual en los términos habituales. El mundo necesita abrir esta conocimiento. Hay una reunión de la OMC.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you.
Pedimos a las compañías que nos ayuden a levantar las patentes.
Thank you. We move to the last round of answers before having the statement from Thierry Breton. So we start with Angela Wang from Pfizer for 4 minutes.
Program and the relationship with BioNTech. I'm going to actually combine questions because I know we won't have time to go through all of them one by one. Just again, to reinforce, that Pfizer made the investments into this particular program, a $2 billion investment that we self-funded and we did at risk. Recognize that BioNTech has a partnership with us, but we need to remember that BioNTech is also an independent company, and part of their work is for themselves and their interests, and part of their work is with us as it pertains to this alliance and this particular COVID vaccine. And so for the COVID vaccine specifically, and for the work that we are doing with BioNTech only as it pertains to the COVID vaccine, we have funded $2 billion of our own money, and we didn't raise any of that. There were a number of questions related to Israel and the results that we're seeing from there. Indeed, the results coming from Israel are very, very encouraging, and they are very consistent with what we saw in our clinical trial. And this was a study that we were very much supportive of, because we knew that early on, having this real-world evidence to demonstrate, to help us learn about the disease and the effectiveness of this vaccine was going to be very important. So more publications will be coming, but because you asked, I'll share with you some preliminary public data, and it's public, so it's something that's probably you may have seen, but for symptomatic control in this real world, in one HMO, we saw a 93.7% efficacy. For hospitalizations, a 93.3% efficacy, and for deaths, 93%. And again, this data is from one study. There are more studies continuing all the time, and that's why we are anxiously waiting to look at the full set of data to help understand what this is. And then just a quick nod to your comment about having digital systems. Yes, indeed, it is very helpful. What it is that we need to do on the variants. In fact, today, Pfizer issued a press release to communicate the fact that we are initiating a booster study, and that we would be boosting those who have already received the first and second doses. They are now going to receive a third dose in some time frame, somewhere between 6 to 12 months, to see whether whether the immunity levels will be able to manage the effects of the new variants. But in addition to that, we are also working on understanding whether we may need a new vaccine altogether with a different genetic sequence. And so both of these approaches is what's going to allow us to deal with the new variants. And the good news, and what you should be very much assured of, is that it's because the mRNA technology is so flexible that with a change in genetic sequence, that's all we need to be able to create a new vaccine. And so we believe that it will take us about 100 days from the time that we start where we identify the code that we want to use to the time where we could have a viable vaccine. Again, we need to work with regulators to be able to understand, what kind of regulatory and approval pathway will be required. And I think it's also important to know that, again, because of the technology, what we need is the sequence, and the rest of the manufacturing process is identical. So we'll be able to manufacture this in very, very rapid order. Storage. Let me just finish maybe with the storage. You had asked about the storage capacity and whether it can be stored at higher temperatures. Again, good question. We are working on that. We are doing stability studies. And in fact, last week we had issued a press release to communicate that we are submitting data to regulatory agencies to see if they would agree to us storing our vaccine at -20. So that's a regular freezer temperature, which we do believe can facilitate storage for some vaccination sites. So this is an area of importance to us. We're working on additional formulations as well, but understanding the temperature storage is something that we will continue to publish on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answers. We move for 1.5 minutes to Paul Stoffel and then 1.5 minutes for Thomas Triomphe.
Okay, so the question on how long would you maintain your network is that as long as needed. At the moment, we have no restraint on making sure that we maximize our capacity. If this is 1, 2, 3, or 4 years or longer, we'll do it, but it will depend on the need. In many times before, we have taken the risk there, like for Ebola and Zika, where the vaccine died out. So, the epidemic died out or was very limited, and therefore, hopefully, we never need this type of capacity again. But for the moment, we don't stop. On your question on is there a risk for other viruses? We are developing an HIV vaccine. We are upscaling for Ebola. We mitigate that with the smaller facilities we have where we can scale up at smaller scale. So hopefully we will not have any delay on the work that we can do there.
Thank you. And we move now to Thomas Triomphe for Sanofi. Thomas Triomphe is...
Mr. Triomphe, could you please press the speak button?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay.
Possible. Okay. So the matter of transparency, first of all, our contract has been published. In terms of the APA contract with the European Union, first of all. Second of all, on the IP landscape, indeed, as mentioned previously, we need a vibrant IP landscape in order to be able to develop new vaccines, and that's why there are new vaccines against COVID-19, thanks to my colleagues. Thirdly, I think it's important also to remember the collaboration we are doing with Johnson & Johnson or with BioNTech are good examples of collaborations that we can do without doing any changes to the IP environment. I think these are important elements. Thirdly, there was a question from Ms. Trier-Lenoir about collaborations in the future. I believe there is indeed strong opportunities by working for the industry with European future, with HERA obviously, and by implementing new industrial networks in Europe through, for example, funding through IPCEI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will now, I think Suri Moon as well, but there was no specific questions to her. So we are going, as we are very late, we thank you again. And we are going to move to the final conclusion of this session and hearing with Commissioner Breton for 5-7 minutes maximum.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, dear President, cher Pascal, cher Christian. Maybe since I understand we are a little bit running short of time, I maybe will have to do this in English. Pascal, do you?
You can do it. You can do it in French for the next 5 minutes.
But maybe it will be a bit longer than 5 minutes because you allow me. I heard 7 minutes, so maybe I will take.
Okay, so you can start in French for 5 minutes and then 2 minutes in English. Let's start.
Bon, alors en tout cas, je voudrais vraiment d'abord en français remercier tout le monde, évidemment les traducteurs, mais remercier surtout vous, cher Président, cher Pascal, cher Christian, de cette formidable initiative. C'est vraiment quelque chose que je crois que nous espérions tous. C'est extrêmement utile. C'est un exercice évidemment de transparence, de démocratie. Moi qui suis chargé désormais depuis maintenant une petite quinzaine de jours de la task force européenne à la demande d'Ursula von der Leyen pour faire en sorte que l'ensemble des industriels que vous avez auditionnés cet après-midi puissent effectivement réaliser l'exploit, je dis bien l'exploit, de délivrer l'ensemble des doses promises pour nos concitoyens, mais aussi au-delà, évidemment. Je voudrais vraiment vous dire que c'est un exercice qui est extrêmement utile et que je tiens à vous en remercier. Je voudrais aussi dire au préalable que Je suis en interaction, évidemment, comme vous le savez, depuis maintenant plusieurs jours, quotidiennement, et même pas uniquement la journée, mais aussi la nuit, parce que l'ensemble des directeurs généraux que vous avez auditionnés des six grands laboratoires sont répartis sur la planète. Je voudrais aussi les remercier, parce que le travail qui est fait est un travail très difficile. Je le leur dis, en ce qui me concerne en tout cas, avec l'équipe que j'ai créée pour répondre à l'objectif que m'a confié la présidente de la Commission, nous sommes là pour aider, nous sommes là pour faire en sorte que les objectifs soient atteints. C'est notre priorité. Je sais que c'est difficile, je sais que c'est un challenge jamais réalisé dans l'histoire industrielle pharmaceutique, jamais. Je le redis, je tiens à le redire devant le Parlement aujourd'hui. Et donc j'essaye d'être là avec mes équipes pour les aider à réaliser cet objectif. Donc merci pour tout cela. Et je voudrais maintenant revenir un tout petit peu dans le détail de la stratégie vaccinale de l'Union, dont vous avez beaucoup parlé au cours des dernières heures. Tout d'abord, quelques mots pour vous dire, et vous êtes évidemment en première ligne, mesdames et messieurs les parlementaires, pour recueillir évidemment les interrogations, les inquiétudes, le besoin de transparence absolument nécessaire, et l'exercice d'aujourd'hui en est évidemment, je dirais, la démonstration très très forte. Nous devons avoir cette transparence et donner les informations en temps réel dès que nous les avons, parce qu'après la transparence, après la solidarité qui nous a permis de mettre toute cette dynamique en route, c'est désormais la confiance qu'il faut gagner ensemble pour pouvoir atteindre nos objectifs. Cette stratégie donc vaccinale, elle a démarré en deux temps. D'abord, évidemment, la signature, vous en avez largement parlé, je ne reviendrai pas, des contrats, avec, je tiens à vous le dire aussi, du côté de la Commission, lorsqu'on a signé, personne ne savait qui serait le premier laboratoire qui nous permettrait d'avoir un vaccin qui fonctionne. Personne. Je crois même pouvoir dire que même les entreprises elles-mêmes ne savaient pas exactement à quelle échéance elles allaient pouvoir fournir, délivrer un vaccin qui marche. Et ceci, au regard de l'expérience qui est la leur, qui est la nôtre, tous collectivement, il faut entre 5 et 10 ans d'habitude pour faire un vaccin. Là, on a mis 10 mois. Donc c'est vraiment un succès tout à fait exceptionnel. Le deuxième maintenant, bien sûr, une fois qu'on a ces vaccins, et on en a un certain nombre, et ils marchent. Vous avez entendu les chefs d'entreprise toute l'après-midi. Ils fonctionnent. Ils vont s'adapter si c'est nécessaire, assez, je dirais, aisément, en tout cas pour certaines technologies. On a parlé de la technologie ARN messager, aux variants. On y travaille en amont. J'y reviendrai dans un instant. Mais mon message, c'est que, évidemment, la mise en œuvre de la stratégie industrielle, elle est évidemment complexe, et que nous sommes là pour aider cette mise en œuvre. Les chiffres qui ont donné au niveau mondial, je crois que c'est important. On essaie d'avoir ces chiffres, j'essaie de vous les communiquer, évidemment, je dirais de façon fréquente, évidemment, pour que ces chiffres soient connus. On a les chiffres de la semaine dernière, mais donc ils ont varié évidemment depuis, parce qu'on produit, heureusement, on accélère la production. Et la semaine dernière, à peu près, il y a en gros une semaine, c'était à peu près un peu moins de 180 millions de doses qui avaient été produites et distribuées au niveau de la planète. Un peu plus de 50 millions aux États-Unis, 40 millions en Chine, 35 millions en Europe. Voilà, c'est ça la réalité. Et depuis, du reste, on a dépassé les 40 millions, puisque sur la semaine, on a les chiffres de la semaine dernière, on est maintenant à plus de 40 millions. Je veux le dire parce que on voit les choses, effectivement, on compare par exemple un pays qui est très important, par exemple comme Israël, mais enfin c'est un pays de 9 millions d'habitants. On sait qu'il y a 3,4 millions d'Israéliens qui ont été vaccinés, vous en avez parlé, vous connaissez le contexte, vous connaissez le fait que les données, effectivement, ont été entièrement utilisées, notamment par Pfizer, et que c'est aussi la raison pour laquelle ce contrat a été signé. On n'aurait jamais pu faire ça, évidemment, vous l'imaginez bien, vous le savez mieux quiconque, en Europe. Donc ça, c'est vraiment l'élément important sur lequel je voulais insister, mais évidemment, on est très loin. Et on est donc au début de cette course, qui est une course, évidemment, de vitesse, dans laquelle il est absolument indispensable de faire en sorte que, d'une part, nous ayons la possibilité d'aider les entreprises à augmenter leur capacité de production. Et ça, donc, on a maintenant une vision très claire, évidemment, de ce qui se passe au niveau européen. Il y a en gros 16 usines qui produisent aujourd'hui en Europe ce qu'on appelle la drug substance. Il y a à peu près 4 usines supplémentaires qui font la drug substance et le fill and finish, et puis plus d'une vingtaine qui font que du fill and finish. Et ça, c'est, je dirais, notre capacité industrielle. La stratégie qui a été adoptée, parce que encore une fois, pour faire une usine vaccinale, il faut, on vous l'a dit, du reste, entre 4 et 5 ans souvent pour démarrer une usine de rien du tout. Donc on a utilisé, nous, et dans la stratégie qui a été mise en place par l'Union, on a demandé évidemment aux entreprises avec qui on a contractualisé. Beaucoup d'entre elles, du reste, n'avaient pas d'expérience industrielle. Elles ont dû, comme vous le savez, trouver des partenaires pour le faire. BioNTech a trouvé son partenaire Pfizer pour le faire, parce que BioNTech n'avait pratiquement pas d'expérience industrielle pour le faire. Moderna, c'était la même chose, même si Moderna a commencé à développer une capacité propre. Mais enfin, le partenaire, c'est Lonza. On sait que Oxford n'avait pas une expérience industrielle forte pour le faire, c'était plutôt un laboratoire académique.
Dear Commissioner, please switch to English because thanking to the interpreters for helping us, they will leave now.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then, as you know, Astrazeneca, I switch in English now. Astrazeneca has been the partner of Oxford in order to make sure that they will be able to provide the industrial resources which are needed. So that's where we are. And then, while selecting this, let's say, partnership in order to provide what is necessary for our European fellow citizens now, and of course, more than that, for our partner outside of Europe, and I will come back on this in a few minutes because I think it's extremely important. We have selected the right partnerships with companies having already a landscape in Europe, mainly, being able to upscale this landscape because it helped us to do it much faster than if they had to start from scratch. Usually, when you upgrade a plant which is already existing, a pharmaceutical plant, to deliver this kind of product or vaccines, it could take up to 2 years. And now the objective is to do it in less than 5 months. So that's another, and some say that it is like a little bit, I don't like this comparison, but I heard this many times, an economy of war, at least in terms of logistics, in terms of making sure to achieve this unbelievable ramping up. Yes, I could tell you that this is something which requires a lot of follow-up and a lot of resources. And by the way, I decided to go myself on the ground as soon as I have been tasked by President von der Leyen. I visited many factories from by the way, our 3 partners today, and I could tell you that what I saw is really reassuring. I can see that the yield in terms of production is really increasing, improving for every single partner. Of course, we are not yet here, and it's normal. I've been myself, as you know, an industrialist, so I know that it's extremely difficult to ramp up a factory. Sometimes you may have an issue or problem. This is why it's important also to have stocks to make sure that we will be able to produce on a more predictable basis what is necessary. But this being said, I could tell you that so far, I think that what I see on the ground is matching more or less what the commitment, of course, that these companies took signing their contract.
Merci. Thierry, could you go to your conclusion, please?
It's not a guarantee yet, but I'm more confident. This being said, my view today is that with everything I see in terms of ramping up, we will be probably at a capacity in Europe around year end, let's say within the next 12 to 18 months, at more than 2.5 billion doses. The capacity in Europe, in continental Europe, will be probably ahead of 2.5 billion doses, which is extremely important. But now, the second thing that we need to control very carefully is the supply chains. That's absolutely mandatory. With my team now, we are working with every single company, the 6 companies you audited today, to make sure that we will be able to anticipate what is needed, because I know and they know that we will have to follow this very carefully. Last point, we need to work closely with the US. That's absolutely mandatory. We are only US and us. We have the only capacity to be able to provide what is needed, of course, for our fellow citizens, but also for the planet. And supply chains are, of course, global. A lot in Europe, some also in the US, and vice versa. So that's why I'm advocating that we will be able to do this strongly together, because at the end of the day, we have, of course, the same objective. The last point, and I'll bring my conclusion, Europe autonomy will lead to also to a global solidarity. So I'm convinced that in Q3, Q4, we will reach what is needed for our European fellow citizens, and then we need to think very quickly to the rest of the world, of course, our neighbors, and also our African friends. And that's really something that I hope that we'll be able to speak in the Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Breton. Thank you for your involvement, for your leadership, for your presence today. On behalf of myself and Pascal Canfin, I'd like to thank all ENVI and ITRE members, thank to the audience, to the technical services of the European Parliament, to ENVI and ITRE Secretariat, once again to interpreters, and of course we will continue to monitor and to be in dialogue with the pharma companies and all the stakeholders in order to win this battle against COVID, together with the help of vaccines. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.